Ladies and gentlemen, kicking off the first stop on his world tour, our new president and prophet, Russell M. Nelson! You say you want some revelation, well, here you go. It's gonna blow your freaking mind.
Greetings, brothers and sisters. Welcome to the weekly Mormon News Roundup, where D-Base and crew will ruminate on the great and spacious beehive. This is episode 77. We've got Mike Russell from Latter-day Conversations, who's co-hosting. President Nelson has turned 99 years old, and Elder Holland has been released from the hospital. We're going to give you some updates on the Cody, Wyoming Temple and also the Heber Valley Temple. And the Brigham Young Papers project has been announced, and we're going to give you much, much more. If you want to get in touch with me, I'm at MormonNewsRoundup.org. You can send me an email to collab@MormonNewsRoundup.org. I'd like to invite onto the program Mike Russell. Mike, how's it going?
Hey, great. Thanks for having me. I'm honored to be on.
Yeah, absolutely fantastic. Now, what's your 45-second Mormon story? Who are you? What's your all about?
Yeah, well, I'm pretty typical in most ways. I grew up in Utah, grew up in the church. Yeah, my story is pretty typical. I served a mission in Houston, Texas. I have lots of interests. Part of why I got into podcasting. I like consuming podcasts and have many other hobbies. So yeah, I'm excited to be on here.
Absolutely fantastic. Now, you're the host of Latter-day Conversations, which you co-host that with Cade. What is Latter-day Conversations?
Yeah, well, it's conversations about really anything church related. So yeah, I and my friend Cade discuss questions on there that we've had. Sometimes we get listener questions and we'll discuss those. Most of them, though, I just come up with. And so far, it's covered mostly doctrinal, theological, philosophical topics. But we're open to even cultural or political questions, too, that are related to the church. So yeah, just really anything relevant to the church. I just want a conversation about it.
Yeah. Now, why did you start Latter-day Conversations to begin with?
Yeah, well, I started because I've heard people in and out of the church make some criticisms that, they hadn't heard this topic discussed with, historical issues or doctrinal issues. And also I've noticed that members sometimes don't dig into the scriptures or do the studying. And I feel like it's important to know about topics, whether it is doctrine or whether it's, cultural things. I think it's fun to talk about too. So I just want to expand that discussion area and help more people to start talking about all sorts of these topics and just get more interaction and spread that knowledge too.
There's tons of LDS podcasts out there, Mike. I'm sure you're aware of that. What makes Latter-day Conversations special and worth listening to?
Well, I hope that it'll get people, thinking about these questions and I don't know, just provide an example of how I study and think and question. Not that I'm, the prime example, but I'm one. I'm a faithful member, have pretty orthodox views, but also I'm sympathetic towards many of the critical views, and I understand a lot of those, and I've got friends in those positions. So I just hope to provide a non-hostile discussion board or area where we can talk about these ideas without feeling threatened or feeling like we have to, set down in one path that, and so I guess in that sense, my podcast is a little different than maybe some other apologetic Orthodox ones or anti-Mormon ones, of course, because as someone who's not a self-proclaimed apologist, I don't feel obligated to take one clear answer path. I'm okay with a question not having a clear answer, but at the same time, I can share my experience and how I work things out and my current thoughts that are liable to change.
Yeah. And what's been the reception to your Latter-day Conversations podcast so far?
Well, pretty small so far. We're a very humble podcast. And so far it's been a good reception. I haven't had any negative backlash or anything like that. But yeah, as we grow, we'll see, what community develops and what kind of communities listening to us. But yeah, so far so good.
Well, that's great. I wish you the very best. Listen to a bunch of episodes, really fantastic conversations. I really like your tone, your approach. I'm sure you're going to go far. But before you go far away, can you give us the Mormon joke of the week?
Yeah. So this one, I You put me in charge of this, and I forgot about it until today. So I'm gonna have to dig into my own repertoire of jokes. And this one is a little crass. I made it up, so I take credit for it. But here it is. Not too crass, don't worry. All right, what did Adam and Eve's children say when they found out they had to marry each other?
I don't know.
If you incest.
Very nice. Okay.
Yes.
All right.
Thank you.
Very nice. I always like homegrown jokes. Homegrown jokes are so much better than Google jokes. You know that?
Right. Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, welcome to the Mormon News Roundup. We're going to jump right into the news here. And believe it or not, we're going to jump in with the #1 news article of the week. And this was covered more than any other LDS-related news. It was covered more than any other LDS-related news article for the entire week, and I can prove that. It's Elder Jeffrey R. Holland, released from the hospital, returns home to recuperate. The church has released a statement acknowledging and appreciation from the Holland family and the apostles' desire to return to active ministering. I definitely wish him the very best, and people are wondering whether they're going to see him in General Conference. And I guess it's kind of interesting to me, this particular article, of why it was so widely covered. And I get a subscription to my Google alerts for the word Mormon or the word LDS every single week. And I can tell you that this was the #1 article. And it kind of gave me pause. Why do you think that a senior member of the church going back home, why do you think that is receiving such widespread coverage here, Mike?
I'm not sure. As far as like news goes, even on the church level, sometimes I'm surprised at, why certain things are in the tabloids when I walk by the grocery store. I don't know why some people, are more apt to be into, certain topics. And this one is a sentimental one. It's important. But yeah, it seems somewhat unremarkable. It just is something, we hear, you read the headline and you're like, I wish him the best. I feel sorry for him. That's hard. He just lost his wife. He's sick. But that's not a story you wouldn't hear, maybe in your own community, with some of the older people in the community. So anyway, wish him the best. But yeah, I'm not sure exactly why it's got disproportionate attention.
Yeah, look, I'm going to give you a screenshot of the day that he was released from the hospital here from my Google alerts here. And you can see here that every single news article virtually for the entire day, and really for the entire, I would say the days surrounding that, was all around him going home. There's a great deal of concern about Elder Holland's health and his well-being, and people really want to connect with the senior leaders of the church, especially when they're in when they've had bad health, when they've been sick. They're extremely concerned about them, and I think that members have a great need to really humanize the Quorum of the 15, to really be able to connect with them on a personal level. And because oftentimes we don't get the personal details from the senior members of the church, when we do, people soak those up like a sponge, and the media wouldn't print these articles if people weren't reading them. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's true. That's a good point. I think there's a good balance to achieve between putting the Quorum of the 15 on a pedestal and kind of making them into these idols. If we got into their lives and kind of idolized them, I think it could get to an extreme. It's certainly not at that point yet. And then on the other side, if you don't know any personal details about them, then sometimes you can go in the same direction, just to, putting them on a pedestal and just thinking of them as non-human. They're these, godlike beings who never make mistakes, who never have to, wear casual clothes and those kind of things. So I think there is a balance. It's good to see their personal and casual side occasionally.
Yeah, I think we could use a lot more of that. In fact, Elder Bednar, about 2 weeks ago, released on his Instagram page a day in the life of Elder Bednar. And I think it went a little bit of the way in trying to humanize him. I think it could have gone even further. But speaking of humanizing the president of the church here, we have President Nelson. He also he turned 99 this week, the longest living president of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. He's a full year older and a full year closer to the century mark. He turned 99 on Saturday, September 9th. People were wondering whether he was going to have a huge birthday party to commemorate the 99th, and I haven't seen anything so far.
Yeah, he's only got one more year, and yeah, his health has seemed just superb lately, but he has noted in the last year or so that he's having to sit down when he gives his talk. Sometimes he has to use a walker, and so he is aging, but he seems to still be in good health, and I expect him to certainly live another year.
Yeah, and so I mean, this particular article from the Salt Lake Tribune talks about his shortest list of his long legacy. I personally believe that his legacy, as of right now, as it stands, I would say that there are 4 things which encapsulate his legacy, and I'll put them in order of what I think he would be most known for. Number 1, disavowing the word Mormon. That has a far-reaching implication. Even non-members really know about that. Number 2 is the prolific temple construction. Number 3 would be what some people have nicknamed the Mormon shrivel, which is the potential decline of actual membership in the church as overall people who self-identify as Latter-day Saints, not the total number of people in the church, but people who self-identify as members of the church. And I would say that number 4 is the EPA, Ensign Peak Advisors, SEC fine. That's my personal, that's what I would personally say that his legacy is as of this moment. Do you disagree with that, or do you see him having a different legacy? Did I get it right, or where did I get it wrong?
Well, yeah, I think the first 2 items on your list of disavowing the word Mormon and prolific temple construction, he directly impacted, whereas the latter 2 items, what you call the Mormon shrivel, where some people use dramatic language if the church is hemorrhaging its members, and the EPA fine, those kind of things are, just consequences. They just happened during his, time in presidency, but, he didn't directly cause them. So, yeah, I think that they'll both be remembered as part of his legacy, although, some he had more effect on than others.
Absolutely. Now, give me a scale. I'm always with the memes here, Mike. Give me a scale of 1 to 10. How's this for a meme? I turned 99 today and nobody even wished me a happy birthday. Good meme, 1 to 10. Bad meme. What do you think?
I don't know. I've got a weird sense of humor. This one doesn't appeal to me too much,
No,
but I can see why some people think it's funny.
Okay, that's a miss. So that we're going to give that a low rating. Now, I personally made this meme, so I'm part of a Trexmo on Facebook. It's a Trexmo is imagine if every member of Star Wars was actually a Latter-day Saint, and then recast all of the episodes based upon that. So I made this meme. Maybe it's a little closer. Maybe it's right up your alley. Not sure. But this is McCoy here who says, "Of course, I want a gaudy, pretentious birthday party when I turn 99." I made that meme. I don't know, 1 to 10. What do you think?
I think in the same ballpark, but since you made it, I'll give it 1 extra point.
Oh, and what would that number be?
I don't know. We'll give it a solid 5.
Solid 5. Okay, I'll take what I can get. Now, speaking of President Nelson and his general conference is just right around the corner, right? I mean, it's coming up. Yeah. It's only a couple of weeks away, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I saw this really interesting analysis on Reddit that I shared with you that I think is very, very interesting. Now, this isn't scientifically proven, and it's only on Reddit, so you can take it with a grain of salt. Is it 100% accurate? I can't say, but I thought it was very, very interesting as far as what it claimed is that it did an analysis of President Nelson, all of his general conference talks since 2018, specifically with regards to whether he was referencing previous presidents of the church and how he spoke. It's a very interesting analysis. I just want to give you a couple of highlights, which I know that you read on this, Mike, but let me just give you a couple of highlights here and get your thoughts. It says that President Nelson has quoted past prophets of the church by name only 5 times in 5 years. And he never once quoted Gordon B. Hinckley nor Thomas S. Monson. But he does reference himself at a high clip. And I thought that was interesting. And before anybody says, well, this is a double standard, if you go back and look at President Monson quoted past presidents by name 42 times. And he quoted President Hinckley 8 times, frequently referring to his predecessor as beloved President Hinckley. And President Monson, he never quoted himself once in General Conference. And in contrast, President Nelson has referenced himself 18 times. So it's just kind of interesting here to see how President Nelson treats his predecessors and himself in General Conference, which seems to be kind of a departure from the way that previous presidents of the church have marketed themselves. I know it's only a Reddit post, but what are your thoughts on this one, Mike?
Yeah, I read into it a bit more, and I think there's data, and then there's the interpretation of data. The data, proposed here or suggested and given is not. Yeah, it's like you said, it's anecdotal, a little sloppy. Maybe it's just kind of an idea or a theory. And then there's the interpretation, and you get the interpretation of the author who gives this results of their study. And also the comment thread below, which is, man, incredibly cynical. But as I dug into it, I found that it is anecdotal and sloppy, and the conclusions associated with the findings are dramatically cynical. The author of this post, he asserts that President Nelson plagiarizes in an attempt to sound like a, and I quote, great creator of such words, but he is not. And that's what they said in there. So I think the conclusions that they're taking from this are just absurd. Like, just because someone is saying a quote doesn't mean that they're trying to take credit for it. Especially in the one he quoted, they give the example in here of President Nelson quoting that one that says the church will continue until the purposes of God shall be accomplished, and the great Jehovah shall say the work is done. And President Nelson, when he says that, doesn't cite Joseph Smith, and this is an egregious sin in the author's eyes. And I'll just point out that this is almost a cliche in the church. It comes from the quote that most people hear some variation of, probably every conference, that says, "No unhallowed hand can stop the work from progressing. The truth of God will go forth boldly, nobly, and independent till it has penetrated every continent," et cetera, et cetera. And goes on and ends with, the great Jehovah shall say the work is done. So I find this to be a cliche, and someone quoting it without explicitly saying Joseph Smith said, I don't find that egregious at all. And I think it's a little silly that the author would, find it as such a horrible thing to do, and then propose this idea that he's trying to ride on the coattails of Joseph Smith's glory and plagiarize him and take his credit from him. I think that's absurd.
I know what I'm going to be watching for in my next general conference, though. I'm going to be watching this one, and I've got something to watch for, which I always appreciate. So we'll take a look and see what we find in this next general conference, see if it fits the pattern. That'll be very interesting to me. Now, to our listeners out there, can you leave us a comment? Do you think that this is accurate? Does President Nelson not quote his predecessors as much? Does he quote himself more often than his predecessors? We want to know your thoughts. Leave us a comment and we drop all these episodes on YouTube live every Sunday night at 9:30. You can join us there. Drop us a note in the live chat. Let us know your thoughts on that. Who's right about this? And hopefully we can settle in the next general conference. Let's take it to our next article here, which this dropped from the Washington Post. Now, James Huntsman, he filed his original tithing lawsuit quite a few years ago. I think it was in 2017, and that was thrown out. He appealed it up to the district court, and it's been breathed new life. It's been sent from the appeals court back down to the original court. And he filed his lawsuit in California. His lawsuit alleges that he wants his tithing that he paid for the church back, that he paid for, I believe, from about 1996 through, I think, 2017. He wants his money back here, Mike. And, for the first few years of James Huntsman's lawsuit here, he was mostly silent about the circumstances. He didn't give a lot of interviews. He didn't go out in the news. And now that the appeals court has breathed a little bit more life, meaning they sent it back to the district court and they said, okay, there may be some grounds for this lawsuit to go forward, specifically surrounding the City Creek Mall and the statements that the church made in regards to the City Creek Mall, which was a commercial development that the church built, that the church had made several statements, including one in particular by President Hinckley, who said that no tithing would be used for the building of City Creek Mall. The appeals court said that a juror may find an issue with that. So it's going to probably be reheard down at the district level. So now he's making the rounds here in the, he went on a couple of different, he's given a couple of different interviews with regards to this, and including also not only he has been giving interviews on this, but this has dovetailed, this Washington Post article dovetails with David Nielsen, who's also been, he was the one who gave the IRS whistleblower complaint, which eventually led to the SEC fine by the church. These two are giving a lot of statements with regards to this, and the LDS church spokesmen have been involved. This is getting re-aired fairly frequently here with regards to this particular lawsuit. How do you feel about James Huntsman and David Nielsen, how they've been portrayed in the Washington Post piece here, Mike?
Yeah, I find it interesting. I mean, I wish I had more expertise in the kind of legal matters that would be relevant to that, and see, if someone wants their tithing back on the grounds that, their tithing was purported to be used one way and they felt it was used another way, and how that might end up changing the situation. So legally, I wonder how it'll pan out. That is sort of interesting to me. As far as the David Nielsen goes with this whistleblowing, Yeah, I find it interesting. From what I understand, the IRS hasn't taken any action against the church in response to his whistleblowing. So from what I've read, there's the other article. I don't know if you want to jump into it yet, but the response by the Weber State professor commenting on that situation. I find that kind of interesting. I wish I had more kind of legal expertise there and could understand the situation and how it all works out. Because, it's interesting if someone says, I want my tithing back, or if they donate to a charity and then later say, I want to have that back. But the one thing that changes this situation is I think that they're proposing that the church use the tithing funds in a way other than, he was under the impression they were going to use it. And so that's what they're going off of. So I wonder how it'll pan out. As far as the whistleblowing goes, it seems like the IRS hasn't taken any reaction to that yet. I don't think anything's necessarily following from that right now, other than a lot of interest and attention in the media.
Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Now, according to David Nielsen's lawyer, the IRS has taken action internally, but that's according to David Nielsen's lawyer. The IRS has not confirmed publicly that they have taken any steps whatsoever in this. So that's a big question. But you found kind of a rebuttal to this week here. I don't know if you want to call it a rebuttal, but you found something that goes along with the same article here this week that you found interesting, and so did I, Mike. And it was published here from the Deseret News. What did you find here?
Yeah, well, it was published there in the Deseret News. You're right. It's by a professor of tax law named Eric Smith. And he gives his stance on it. He explains the situation, and he says in the media, they cover this, they give the story, but what they don't talk about is the actual law and how this will pan out. And he's saying that the church has not committed any violation of the law, and that he basically gives his opinion that he thinks nothing will come of this, and that they don't have any leverage against the church, legally speaking.
Yeah, I read the article, and we did an entire episode on the 60 Minutes episode with Bishop Waddell, where this was originally brought to a national news audience. And we had Ryan McKnight on, and we also had Colby Reddish on. And honestly, I think that was the best episode that we ever recorded. I'll have to put that into the show notes because part of it got copyright striked on YouTube. But the podcast, which is almost 3 hours long, was probably our greatest episode. Now, from reading what Eric Smith said, part of David Nielsen's allegation was that the church had not engaged in charitable, that Ensign Peak Advisors had not engaged in any charitable activities. And what Eric Smith and others have pointed out is that under the IRS law, you don't have to engage in any charitable giving whatsoever. You can just sit on Ensign Peak. In fact, you could just take all the tithing donations, put it in someone's mattress, and never spend one dime of it, and it would not be against the law. I think the slight difference between Eric Smith and the last article that we saw was that James Huntsman is specifically referencing public church statements from senior church leaders, including President Hinckley, who said that tithing would not be used for a certain purpose. And at least the appeals court has said that a reasonable juror may conclude that indeed tithing was used as part of City Creek Mall. So I think that these two articles are somewhat of an apples and oranges. Any last thoughts on this one?
Yeah, that may be the case. Perhaps Eric Smith is ignorant of some of those details. I don't know, but he has the credentials to give his opinion. It's just a matter of how many of these fine details that may qualify the situation end up making a difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, our next article here, this has been brewing here for some time. There's a huge undeveloped Mormon-owned land that goes on the market in Clay County. I just want to play a little bit of this. This was published on September 8th. This was from Fox 4, the local affiliate there. The church is selling a lot of land here in Clay County, which, if you know your LDS history, is a very important county. Let me play a little bit of this for you here, Mike.
Of undeveloped property in the KC Metros going up for sale in Clay County.
There's a lot of interest in Lee Summit, 4 single-family homes and 4 subdivisions.
Now, I was always taught, Mike, honestly, that I think it's the 11th article of faith that we believe in the literal gathering of Israel, and that the New Jerusalem will be built upon the American continent that will be centered around Independence, Missouri, and that city would be 1,000 miles by 1,000 miles. At least that's what I was taught. I could be wrong about that, but this is all of the sacred land to Latter-day Saints that was supposed to be built up for Zion. I mean, this is supposed to be Zion. If you talk to Joseph Smith, if you talk to Brigham Young, all the way up to Lorenzo Snow, we didn't give up on the idea of returning to Jackson County, Missouri until like maybe Heber J. Grant. And now the church is selling 2,000 acres here, also another 2,000 acres near Kansas City, Missouri. What happened to reclaiming Zion?
Yeah, that's a good question. There has been a shift in the church when they talk about the literal gathering of Israel. I think there are several talks in the last decade or two where they address this topic and approach it in a more figurative way as the church has become more global. But yeah, it is an odd perspective when you contrast it with the early saints, because if you do read the early saints, Joseph Smith and them, you will get the picture that they thought Christ was probably coming in their lifetime, that they were going to gather in the land of Adam-on-Diamond in Missouri, wherever it was, with the city of whatever dimensions. They even drew out some maps and planned out the cities. But yeah, I think it is an interesting question, because you say, well, is that still going to happen? Are we going to go back to Missouri before the second coming? And I don't know, it's interesting. I don't really know what the answer to that question is, or how to reconcile that with our history and the views that were quite apparent with Joseph Smith and some of those early church leaders.
Yeah, well, we're going to have to wait and see what happens. It seems like that the church had been stockpiling land in Missouri and now seems to be giving up a little bit on that land now that it can be sold for a profit. That's interesting to me, because I would have thought that the church would continue to, the church is the number one holder of real estate in the United States by total valuation, and is number two in the United States by actual number of acres owned. So it's always surprising to me to see the church getting rid of some of the portfolio that it has, considering how much it values its land ownership. And the last two places on earth that I would think that the church would give up land would be in Utah or in Missouri, Clay County. That's where, after the saints were driven out far west and independence, they had to settle in Clay County in, I believe that was 1838, before they moved on to Quincy, Illinois, which eventually was renamed to Nauvoo. So it's just surprising to see the church giving up on this land. Any last thoughts on this one?
Yeah, all I can deduce from it is that apparently that land is deemed as not important enough to retain for them. Assert that maybe the motive is for profit, but in light of David Nilsson's whistleblowing of how much money the church has, I doubt that's the motive. Maybe contributed, but I doubt it. So all I can take from it is they didn't think that land was terribly important or necessary for the future interests of the church, and I don't know exactly why, but yeah, I doubt it's for the money, because they could have sold other land or liquidated some of their other assets, much more in priority before that land if it was so important to them.
Yeah, if it's one thing that we know, that the church is definitely not hurting for money. So who knows what the reason is, but we'll be watching this in the Mormon News Roundup. If you could like and subscribe to our humble podcast here, we'd be very grateful for that. And on YouTube, we're almost to 1,000 subscribers, which is kind of a milestone. So hit that notification bell while you're at it. Now, we also found this article this week, which I thought was very interesting here. And this was from the this was from the Salt Lake Tribune. Andy Larson, how do Latter-day Saints compare to members of other religions, examining 8 categories of data. So we're going to walk through, how do Latter-day Saints stack up in gun ownership, TV watching habits, views on the minimum wage, and a bunch of other metrics. So first one that we get here is LDS views on political affiliation. And if you pull up the actual data that's behind that, partisanship composition of Latter-day Saints, what do we find out about the partisan composition of Latter-day Saints from this article here, Mike?
Yeah, well, you see that it's about a 70-30 split between Republican and Democrats in the church. But the younger members, the ratio is higher for Democrat, and as you go to the older members, the numbers are higher for Republicans. The independent group is pretty stagnant for all age groups, which I found interesting. But yeah, I guess indicative maybe of our demographics of living in Utah or the church, in the States. I don't know. I found it interesting though.
Yeah, Ryan Burge is one of the best research out there. He's got a lot of very good stats. There's the next one that he brought up here. Also, we want to cover up a bunch of these rapid fire here. Notice how much more moderate average young Latter-day Saints seem themselves. They're slightly right of center. So it's asking you, go ahead and place yourself. Are you a Democrat? Are you a Trump Republican? Are you a standard Republican? Go ahead and place yourself in here. And if you take a look at it, and do you lean liberal? Are you somewhat conservative? Latter-day Saints really are very, very conservatives, on the somewhat conservative to conservative. There's somewhere between somewhat conservative and conservative. And honestly, I thought this was a little bit of a surprise because I thought you would see a lot more Latter-day Saints on the very conservative spectrum. But no, they're just in the somewhat conservative or slightly conservative portion of this particular poll. What we want to cover also is what do people actually watch on TV? What networks do people watch? What networks do Latter-day Saints watch? And this is based off of the last 24 hours. So Latter-day Saints, when you take a look at this graph here, 31% of them have watched ABC. CBS, 37% have watched CBS in the last 24 hours. NBC, 38%. CNN, very low, 25%, the lowest out of all of these categories here. Fox News, pretty high here, Mike, pretty high, only behind basically white evangelicals. MSNBC, very low, 16%. PBS, 13%. And other is 22%. Anything strike you in this particular data set?
Not so much in light of the previous graphs, because, you know, we see that demonstrably the members of the church are mostly conservative. So it makes sense that they would mostly consume conservative media. And there aren't as many conservative media outlets that are popular as there are left-winging, as far as my perspective goes, which leaves them with pretty much all Fox. So I think it's kind of concentrating all of their media consumption into that media outlet because that's their only good choice, I guess. I don't know.
Yeah, absolutely. And this also talks about gun ownership. Do you own a gun in the house? This is self-reported data, of course. And the most likely to own a gun out of all of the faith traditions would be white evangelicals at 54%. But Latter-day Saints, they're one of only two faith groups that over 50% of them own a gun. 52% of Latter-day Saints have a gun in the house. Whereas on the lowest level, you have Hindu and Jewish, which is Hindu is 8%, Jewish is 17%. Over 50% of Latter-day Saints own a gun. Does that surprise you, or is that what you expected, Mike?
Well, I think this is one of the graphs that can get a little sticky. You know, in my line of work, I am a data scientist. I work in this stuff, so data interpretation is pretty important. And with this data set, I was pulling it off Pew Research, the one that Ryan uses. And with the data, I was looking at the sample of the members of the church is younger than most of the other people in the data set, and also it's concentrated mostly in Utah because that's where most of the members live. It was a good sample of the church, but you just have to make some distinctions and make sure you're not drawing conclusions of like, if you're a member, that means just intrinsically you're more likely to own a gun. That's not so. It's just most members live in Utah, California, Idaho, whatever. And maybe people from those states, not California, but Idaho and Utah, are more likely to own a gun than people who are on the East Coast, where almost no members live in our church,
That's a good point. The next article or next item that it compares is, are racial problems in the United States, are they rare, isolated situations? So if you take a look at this, do you think, this talks about the percent in agreement here. Racial problems in the United States are rare and isolated. If you take a look at Latter-day Saints here, 34% of them, about 35% of them say yes, racism is rare and isolated, which is a little bit higher than almost any other group. It seems like Latter-day Saints aren't as concerned about racism based upon this particular data point than other people. Is that what you're getting from this as well?
Say that again, what your conclusion was?
It says, yeah, racial problems in the U.S. are rare and isolated situations. 35% of Mormons think that racism is quite rare. And that's leading almost all the other faith traditions: Jewish, Muslim, Buddhist, Hindu, white it only trails behind white evangelicals of saying that racism is rare and isolated. Do you think that racial problems are rare and isolated? What is this graph telling you about Latter-day Saints here, Mike?
Well, yeah, what it tells me is that members have that opinion. It's pretty straightforward, but it is somewhat surprising in the political landscape because I feel like, my perspective is that people are quite sensitive to racial issues, and especially following, the George Floyd stuff. There's been a lot of like racial hype, and in my view, I think it is kind of a dramatized and in some ways, importantly so, but in other ways, it's kind of an overhyped issue. We live in a country where it's, racial issues are not as present as they have been, in almost all human history. But anyway, this is about people's perception of it. And it appears that, members of the church don't see it as big of an issue as some of the other ones besides white evangelicals.
Yeah, definitely. That's the conclusion. A couple of last ones here, because this is a very fascinating article here, and we linked all these in the show notes here. This asks a question: should the military, the U.S. military in particular, ban transgender people out of the military? And leading the way is 60% of white evangelicals answer that question as yes. And Latter-day Saints are second, right behind, with 46% of Latter-day Saints saying yes, the U.S. military should ban transgender people from serving in the military. That's very, very high. What are your thoughts on this particular this data point here, Mike?
Yeah, this one was interesting. There were the three categories, if I remember, of the racial chart. So this is the second one of the three. And yeah, this one does lead one to conclude that, as far as, or this one's not racial, this is more about trans rights and stuff. But yeah, I think it may have to do with, some of the family proclamation views, the identity views of the church, especially President Nelson has taught about identity and honed in on that topic. So maybe that's kind of solidified some of our views there and made it less flexible than some people in other Christian faiths feel, perhaps. That's my only theory.
Yeah, the last data point from this particular article talks about the mean household income of Latter-day Saints. How does that stack up with other faith traditions? And I was a little bit surprised by this. Reformed Jews, conservative Jews, Hindu Episcopalians, those are making a mean household income of $70,000. Whereas you find Latter-day Saints, they're almost exactly in the middle here with a mean household income of $51,000. And quite frankly, I was kind of expecting Latter-day Saints to be a little bit higher in the mean household income of religious traditions. Maybe I have that in error, but I always was of the mindset that Mormons made a lot of money. But this particular data point seems to refute that.
Yeah, this is one of those ones that I feel like the chart misrepresents it. The guy Ryan who put this together is a established, credentialed statistician, data scientist. But this chart, I think, can be a little misleading because, as I mentioned, the sample of Latter-day Saints is younger than the rest of the data set. So you're comparing apples with oranges. You're saying a sample who has an average age of about 30 to 35, and you're comparing their income to the data set whose average age is more like 50 or something in that range. And so naturally you expect, a 50-year-old to make more than a 30-year-old. And so I dug into the data. I found, well, if you take the members of the church sample and you find those who are in the age group 50 to 55 or whatever was the most popular and common in the data set, and you find their income, it actually is more in the range of 100 to 150,000.
Very interesting stuff. However, there is the caveat. It seems like Latter-day Saints are more likely to have single income households. So that may be driving the number down as well. Hard to say. Now, the last data point here is a church tradition, church attendance of the 49 traditions. Lots of very interesting nuggets here. Latter-day Saints come in very, very high on the total amount of church attendance. At least 64% of them attend a church at a weekly, and then another 15% is a yearly. And then only 22% say that they never attend church. So this is among the highest of all the faith traditions. And quite frankly, this is exactly what I would have expected.
Yeah, in fact, I see Mormon in third. Was there another one? I can't see the
Mormon is third. Apostolic Christian is on top. Pentecostal Holiness is second. And Mormon is right behind with third. Very, very high percentage of Latter-day Saints go to church weekly, and even more than that, at least yearly. It's very, very important to Latter-day Saints to attend church, which is exactly what I would expect.
And in the data set I looked at, those two that beat us out of the Apostolic Christian and Pentecostal, in the data set that only comprises 30 reported individuals. So that's an incredibly small, it's maybe some local church that they sampled some group and they just happen to only get a few representatives of them. So it's going to be artificially high. But I think among the popular sects, I think we have the highest church attendance.
Yeah, if those are very, very small, they would be outliers. And it seems like Latter-day Saints, once again, are very, very high. So let us know your thoughts. We're on Instagram here. We're on TikTok, the Mormon News Roundup. You can find us in both of those. Let us know your thoughts about how Latter-day Saints compare to members of other religions. We'd be very grateful for that. Now, we've come to this portion of this broadcast here where we're going to go over the temple updates. And, this really caught my eye this week here, Mike. This was put out by the Wasatch County, KPCW. Proposed. Now, the church broke ground on the Heber Valley Temple, I think about 2 years ago, but it still does not have the approval to start building the edifice itself. They kind of put the cart before the horse, I would say, because this is in litigation because Wasatch County does not want the church. Wasatch County City Council in particular said, we don't want to pollute our dark skies with the temple. So it is in litigation. And this also dropped this week, which I found to be very interesting. Proposed Heber Valley Temple may need to pump out 1 million gallons of groundwater daily. So during the period of construction, because of the where it's going to be built is on an 18-acre lot. The church commissioned a study and says it's going to have to continuously pump water out of that ground to build it. It's going to be a significant challenge to get this temple put into Wasatch County. What are your thoughts on the impact of the Heber Valley Temple on Wasatch County here, Mike?
Yeah, from what I read, it seems like the studies that they do on these proposed constructions in this particular location are quite typical. Maybe they have a lot of groundwater, but the amount of water they have to pump out for this is astonishing to me. I'm not, in construction, so I don't know how typical this is. Maybe it wouldn't, make a construction, someone who's, does this every day. Maybe it's pretty more commonplace than I think. But the numbers they said they're going to have to do a dewatering phase before they construct the temple, which will consist of pumping out 1 million gallons of water per day for about 2 months. And then after that dewatering phase, they're going to have to continue to pump 300,000 gallons a day. I guess forever. I don't understand that.
I think only during the construction phase. That we're talking about just the construction phase of getting the water out of there so that you can make a foundation that's settled and ready to go, and not because it's kind of put into an odd place that is interacting with the water table and the groundwater. So you got to pump all that out, and then the groundwater comes back in. So you have to keep pumping hundreds of thousands of gallons of water out of this every single day during the construction phase. It's going to be a massive endeavor. In fact, the church is supposed to they have to get permission for this type of thing from FEMA because there's so much water that they're going to have to displace. And what the Wasatch County people said is that they said, our doors are open and our phone lines are open to the church for communication, but we haven't been able to get any responses from the church project manager or the church's architects. They're just not interested in talking to us. So this is why this is a puzzling situation. You announce the temple in an area that is quite problematic. You run into a lot of issues with the city council who says, we don't want our dark skies polluted. So you sue the county. You're taking them to court. The church has engaged a private law firm, not Carton and McConkie, a real estate law firm, to push this over the finish line. And now that there's this groundwater issue, the county is saying, hey, can we talk about this? And you say, no, we're not going to talk about this. This doesn't seem like the church is playing very nice and trying to get this temple over the finish line.
Yeah, well, I don't know all the details. I mean, there are, I'm sure, complaints every place they build a temple, but that doesn't maybe, it's not representative of the neighborhood as a whole or the community as a whole, just because you have some, squeaky wheels. Maybe that's the case. I think it would be good of the church to issue some kind of interaction with them, and communication. But yeah, it's funny that building on that water table reminded me of Monty Python on the Holy Grail when the king builds his castle, falls down in the swamp, builds it again, falls in the swamp, builds it again, and it burns down. The church is dedicated though, and they build it a fourth time and it stays. So hopefully that's we'll see. Hopefully it works out.
The wise man built his house upon a rock, right? Something like that. So the church makes a lot of announcements to the church's newsroom about the temples that are going well. In fact, they just announced that for the first time ever, 3 temples would be dedicated on the same day, but they almost never provide updates for temples like this, the Heber Valley Temple, which is going through litigation, or our next article either, which is the Cody, Wyoming Temple. And this was just released here by the Cowboy State Daily here, this dispute over the proposed Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints temple in Cody, Wyoming. This was released on September 14, 2023. There has been so many lawsuits filed in this case that I'm having a hard time keeping track of it all, because the church has sued the city, the church has sued the planning commission. That's two different lawsuits. And then there's been they call them countersuits. I'm not sure if that's the technical term here, but the Preserve Our Cody neighborhood has sued the church. And now there's an additional lawsuit that was announced this week. There is 4 lawsuits associated with getting this Cody, Wyoming temple in here. And this is causing a lot of consternation in the Cody, Wyoming in the Cody, Wyoming neighborhood. What's your thoughts on this Cody, Wyoming temple, Mike?
Yeah, well, as a native of Wyoming, I was born there. I grew up in Utah, but I can speak with maybe a little harsher criticism towards some of the Wyoming people. I'm just kidding. No, I don't have much criticism, but I think, it's a very rural area, and the complaints I heard are that it's going to cause light pollution and block their view. Like, it's kind of petty. I mean, I think it's beautiful, but yeah, again, I don't know how representative those complaints are of the community as a whole, or if it's just some people that are very annoyed. But it is, you know more background to this than I do, and from what I even read, it seems like there is enough of a movement that they are, actually going through with the suits, and so it must be serious enough to them. But yeah, in my mind, it seemed kind of petty. I'm like, really ruining your view? It's a beautiful temple, light pollution. I don't know. I think it's a beautiful thing, and hopefully we can come to a resolve in some kind of way to satisfy both parties.
I think it is definitely going to get I think it is definitely going to get resolved, but in a way that satisfies both parties. I think that could be more difficult. Because the church in Heber Valley and the church in Cody, Wyoming is signaling that they are not going to take no for an answer. You don't want our temple. You have issues with the lighting. You have issues with the traffic. You have issues with the zoning. That's too bad, because we're going to take you to court over it. And we're going to use those billions in Ensign Peak to push this temple over the finish line, regardless of whether there's water issues, regardless of whether there's zoning or traffic issues, regardless of the sentiments of the community that's involved. The church is citing a kind of an obscure religious law that was passed through Congress. It's a federal law that basically says that any religious organization can put up almost any structure that they want if it's for religious purposes. And if this ends up going to federal court, most likely the church is going to get its way in both of these cases. There's only one temple that I know of that the church has been turned away from, and that was the Erda, Wyoming temple, where they announced it and then had to retreat on it. Any last thoughts on these temple updates here, Mike?
Yeah, my view is not so cynical of the church. I don't see them as this, power hungry, organization that's trying to annoy local residents. I think they're progressing in the work of salvation and building temples that they legally have the right to build. And I think the complaints that have been proposed range from petty to some mild annoyance. I don't know. I just don't find it as a incredibly legitimate case that they're trying to make against it, at least in this situation.
I think that I think Cody and I think Heber Valley, Wasatch County, I think that they're all going to lose. I think that the church is going to win in both of these cases. And it may be a protracted battle, because the Preserve Our Cody neighborhoods, for instance, has received some outside funding, and the Wasatch County attorneys, they have a lot of money as well. So this is going to probably take a long time. But I think what I see on the horizon on this is the church having a complete and utter landslide of a victory. That's my humble prediction. Let me know in the comments what you think. What do you think about Mike's philosophy? Do I have the right take? Let us know your thoughts on these temples. We'd be very interested to know that. Now, we've got a couple last articles here to get through. Try to get these done in an hour. This was very interesting here. Mike, you brought this to my attention as well. Historians introduce Brigham Young Papers project and the first volume of journals. Mike, what's going on with this article that was released by Trent Toon on 12 September?
Yeah, so it looks like they're putting together, following this, completion of the Joseph Smith papers, where they gathered all of the quotes and words of Joseph Smith. Now they're doing the same with Brigham Young. So this is a big endeavor, and I think it'll be fascinating. I see it as a move toward transparency in church history. So that's a great thing. People have been wanting this from, within and without the church. A lot of critics claim that the church needs to be more transparent. Well, here's a move to be more transparent. And I think it's great. As someone who likes to dig into church history, I think it'll be a good resource once it's done. And maybe we can find some new insights from Brigham Young that we haven't been well aware of before.
Absolutely. What I didn't realize about this, this particular article here, is that the first volume, there's going to be a 4-volume set here of the journal series. The first volume has already been released, Mike. It was released in August. Yeah, they've already released. That's what the cover of it looks like here. And Brigham Young was an extremely prolific journal writer. He wrote in his own hand for the vast majority of his life. Now, he stopped writing in his journal about the last 15 years. He stopped personally writing in his journal, but this is going to give a unique glimpse into the life of Brigham Young. And it's going to be in the same vein as, obviously, as the well-known Joseph Smith Papers project. They're going to say that this Brigham Young project is going to take decades because the Joseph Smith Papers project took 20 years, and it took a team of historians that long. I don't know exactly how many people were on the team. It was like maybe 20 or 30 people. I don't know that for a fact. But it's going to be in the same vein. And it kind of reminded me that the Joseph Smith Papers project, it just wrapped up, I believe it was 2 months ago. And that was funded by the late Larry H. Miller, and continued the funding by Gail Miller, which actually made me wonder here, Mike, is the church actually going to pay for the Brigham Young Papers project, or is this going to be a private donor? And we have the answer to that. The church themselves commissioned this Brigham Young Papers project. So I don't think that it was done by any donors. It's going to be an internally funded project.
I wasn't even aware of the external funding for the Joseph Smith Papers. That's interesting, but I'm glad that project happened. So again, this seems like good transparency in church history. Great. Let's get all the info and just make it publicly accessible.
Right. Yeah. Joseph Smith Papers project was funded $10 million by Larry H. Miller, the late, great Larry H. Miller. So yeah, this one, I believe that the church is actually coughing up the money to fund this one on their own, which I think is good. And more factual church history is obviously a good thing. I do hope, Mike, that this will be a little different than the teachings of the Presidents of the Church Brigham Young Manual. Because if you're familiar with the teachings of the Presidents of the Church Manual from Brigham Young, because I remember going through that, it was an extremely sanitized version of Brigham Young that, in my opinion, was a serious disservice to Brigham Young's legacy. For instance, it never mentioned that he was a polygamist in the entire volume. So hopefully we're going to get something a lot better than what we've seen before. But this isn't the only thing that's happening in church history, too. You found this and brought this to my attention as well here, Mike. What's going on with Joseph Smith and his biography?
Yeah, well, at the same time as this Brigham Young project is starting, we also find this announcement that the church is going to write a biography on Joseph Smith. And they commissioned Richard Turley to write the book. So Richard Turley has been involved with the church's history and family history departments for over 35 years. I think he retired a few years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and now he's been commissioned for this. So his background was initially in law, but then he got hired 35 years ago or more to work for the church history department, and has headed up a lot of stuff, been involved with the Joseph Smith Papers. And so, it'll be interesting to see what the church produces.
Yeah. Do you and we were talking about this in the coordination call. You think that this history is going to be more like a Saints volume rather than a Joseph Smith Papers volume? Do I have that about right?
Yeah, unfortunately. Like, I was excited when I heard it because I was thinking, oh, this is going to be very exhaustive. And, I loved Rough Stone Rolling by Richard Bushman. I love that book. And I wish we could even go into more detail and get a book that's more exhaustive. But the church, and I think, they have practical reasons for this. They want to speak to a large audience. And so they have to make it readable in a way that most members are going to want. And most members don't want the same, exhaustive completeness that I want. So it's probably going to be more like the Saints volumes, where it's, it is more digestible and, I don't know, condensed, I would say.
Yeah, I do find it somewhat remarkable that Richard Turley is not a trained historian, and he was the head of the church history department for a number of years. Kyle McKay, who is the current director of the church history department, is also not a trained historian. Both of these individuals are lawyers. I would love to see the church commission a Joseph Smith biography from someone who's a trained historian who, I mean, got a bachelor's in history, got a master's in history, got a doctorate in history, not someone who spent a great deal of his life in law. I don't know what being a lawyer has to do with writing a biography of Joseph Smith. Are there not enough great historians out there? Non-member history. Why does this have to be written by a member of the church? Why can't we commission from the church some of the great historians on this planet to write the definitive biography of Joseph Smith using all of the church's materials that it has at hand in First Presidency vaults, in secret vaults that you and I don't have access to? Only the church can write this particular volume. And, I would just love to see it be done by a regular historian. Is that too much to ask?
I think that's a fair desire or requirement. I think there are lots of people, that could be turned to for this. And I do have to say that from the article I read, they are going to involve lots of historians in this process. It's not just Richard Turley writing this solely. It's not his project alone, but it's going to involve lots of historians. And to be fair to him, most of his expertise is not in law, I guess, based on his history of practice. His practice in law was fairly short compared to his involvement with church history and the Joseph Smith papers. So I think he does have more expertise than most historians, and especially when it comes to Joseph Smith. So I think he's well credentialed, but yeah, it is kind of odd. He doesn't even have a degree in it, but I think he's credentialed. He's qualified to speak on this issue, but there are many to choose from. Richard Bushman could be consulted, and I don't know, maybe he's involved in it too. But yeah, they're trying to produce a saints-like volume. So that may be why they turn to him rather than, turn into someone else. If they were producing what I was looking for, an exhaustive history, maybe they would be turning to some of the more renowned historians.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you think about the number of biographies that have been written over the years that have been on Joseph Smith, we had J.B. Turner, Mormonism in All Ages. We had Lucy Mack Smith, the biographical sketches of Joseph Smith. We have the very famous Fawn Brody, No Man Knows My History. Obviously, we have Richard Bushman, Rough Stone Rolling. We have Dan Vogel, Making of a Prophet. It just kind of reminded me that before you pointed this article to my attention, I didn't really realize that the church has never written a definitive biography of its founder. Why hasn't the church tackled this subject? It's been over 200 years. Why are we just now getting around to writing a definitive history?
Yeah, it's interesting, in the church's approach, it seems that they've left a lot of the scholarly endeavors to outside sources and haven't taken that upon themselves. And that's been a, move for them. And I think it works out well. I could see them getting overly consumed in the scholarly and academic side. And I see some wisdom in turning that to other people. But I just want to see it happening. So whether the church sponsors it, directly or directly produces it or indirectly sponsors it, that would be great. I just like to see the history made transparent, and so people have access to it.
We got two last articles to get through, and we're going to do these pretty fast here. This is a new article that was from the Greek Reporter, and its DNA analysis reveals origins of Native Americans. And I found this from Thomas Murphy, the famous geneticist here and anthropologist. This is a very interesting article here because what this argues here, they've conducted a recent survey on mitochondrial DNA, uncovering compelling evidence for multiple migrations that took place between the Americas, China, and Japan during the last ice age and subsequent period of ice melt. And that was what was interesting. So the previous analysis really had said that, that probably the Native Americans came from the Mongolian region of Asia and that they walked across the land bridge that connected Alaska and modern day Alaska and Russia while the ice bridge was formed. And that was from a period of about 25,000 years ago to 10,000 years ago. And that's where they all came from. But this article looks at the mitochondrial DNA. And what it finds is that it's impossible that they all walked across at that time because there was later migrations that took place from about 10,000 BC to maybe 6,000 BC, which must have taken place after the ice bridge had melted, and therefore it must have taken place on ships. Either that or they swam. So it must have been on ships. And that kind of throws what I conventionally have thought up on its head. I hadn't really considered that type of stuff. You read the article. What are your thoughts on this one, Mike?
Yeah, it was a little confusing at first. I got the wrong idea, but then I realized, so they didn't sail, directly across the Pacific to the Americas, but as the picture shows there, they were just sailing along the coast, as water travel would have been, I guess, better for, carrying their things and easier than walking. So I can see why they made that choice, but they just sailed along the coast across there and followed the same route along the land bridge. I don't know, did it say if the Bering Strait they expect would have been melted at that point or not, and they just chose to be sailing?
Yeah, the Bering Strait melted. The Bering Strait, there was an ice bridge that lasted up until about 11,000 years ago. Then there was some kind of a Holocene era event that forced that ice bridge to melt or to break up of some kind. I don't know what the reason is behind that, but it's saying that the migrations continued across that period of time, even though there was no more ice bridge, which means that they must have done it on ships, which actually, if you know your Book of Mormon history, it says that they came on ships. So is this a win for Hagoth? And is this a win for Book of Mormon historicity here, Mike?
Well, the timetables might be a little off, but if we really stretch, maybe we can make that work.
Yeah, timing is a little off, but it's amazing. We continue to find out new things about how people came to America, and I'm always very, very interested in that. That does take us to our final article here, and this was a really, really strange one because it just hit just a couple of days ago here, September 5th, 2023. This is some really weird stuff here, Mike, and it says Mormon Church. This was an article that was put out by Vice, and I'm just reading the article here. Mormon Church denounces Tim Ballard's morally unacceptable activity. So a church spokesperson has told Vice News, an LDS church spokesperson told Vice News that Tim Ballard betrayed his friendship with a powerful leader who never authorized his name or the name of the church to be used for Tim's personal or financial interests. Now, if you know anything about Tim Ballard, he formed the OUR organization, Operation Underground Railroad, which was supposed to be an anti-human trafficking organization. Supposedly, the idea behind the organization is that you pay money, and then Tim Ballard and his operatives, his special forces contacts or his law enforcement contacts would go and rescue kids who were supposedly being either sex trafficked or in horrible situations. And there's a lot of allegations that money that was sent to our organization actually didn't go to doing what it was supposed to do. Those are the allegations. Now the church has come out extremely forcefully and condemned Tim Ballard. And what are your initial thoughts on this one, Mike?
Yeah, well, there are a lot of things I don't understand about the situation, but yeah, it seems like, it's kind of through the grapevine, like a church spokesperson heard it from Elder Ballard, who told Vice, that this story that apparently Elder M. Russell Ballard had a relationship with Tim Ballard, some kind of association, and that he felt their relationship of trust was breached when Tim Ballard used his name as reference in a way with a powerful figure that just was a breach of trust to him. So he wanted to kind of disavow that association and make sure that it was clear, that maybe also clarifying to people that Tim Ballard is not Elder Ballard. For people outside the church, that may be a confusion. So maybe that's why.
Yeah, they're not at all related, apparently, although they did have contact. And this is from the statement itself. It said, once it became clear that Tim Ballard had betrayed his friendship with Elder Ballard through the unauthorized use of President Ballard's name for his personal advantage and activities regarded as morally unacceptable, President Ballard withdrew his association. President Ballard never authorized his name or the name of the church to be used for Tim's personal or financial interests. And it says in this statement that President Ballard has not contacted Tim Ballard for many months. So this is just, I don't know. I find this to be a very puzzling statement. I have no problem with the church coming out and denouncing anyone. In fact, I have no problem with them denouncing Tim Ballard. It appears that the allegations that Tim Ballard was using the name of the church or using his associations for illicit reasons, and that his organization allegedly didn't rescue children and was involved with a lot of shady things. Those are all allegations, and I see no reason to doubt those allegations. So I have no problem with the church denouncing Tim Ballard. The question that I have, Mike, is there is a lot of evil people on this planet. We have people who are responsible for mass killings and hundreds of thousands of deaths, like Vladimir Putin, who launched a totally unjustified war, or Bashir al-Assad, who's currently presiding over a horrific Syrian civil war, or Kim Jong-un, who has starved millions of people and killed a lot of people. There is a lot of really evil people on this planet. Now, none of those people have been rebuked by the church. In fact, the church goes after almost no one by name, except for Tim Ballard. That's where the church draws the line. I'm just wondering, why do all of these evil despots and horrible tyrants and genocidal maniacs and homicidal killers, serial pedophiles, those don't have a moment's worth of mention, but Tim Ballard, no, he's got, what do they say, morally unacceptable activities. I just wonder why.
Yeah, well, the portrayal matters, so I want to make sure it's clear, though, in the article, all that's saying is that a church spokesman told Vice or Vox, who was it that published again? Vice,
V-I-C, Vice.
Mm-hmm. The church spokesman told them that Elder Ballard, kind of severed that association or felt offended by that. I don't think they were saying, here is the list of the most morally, horrible people. I think you can criticize someone fairly, or sever ties with someone without being held to the standard that you should have named in priority the most wicked, evil people before them. But also, it reminds me of the Reddit article that we had reviewed earlier, where people are just tearing apart President Nelson for this obscure, sloppy study where they say he quotes himself too much and not his predecessors enough, and accusing him of being egotistical and slandering him. And then, people, you'll see all kinds of horrible things they'll say at him, swearing, calling him all kinds of names. And you could say the same thing to these kind of audience and say, of all the evils in the world, all of the atrocities out there and evil people, why are you attacking President Nelson, this man who has dedicated himself to, charity and this religion and what he believes to be the work of God? I think there are much more just targets to direct your hatred and bitterness toward.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate your sentiments. I wish you the very, very best on your Latter-day conversations. That is going to be a very great endeavor. I'm sure you're going to have more subscribers in the Mormon News Roundup in short order, Mike.
Yeah, I appreciate it. I enjoy talking with you, and I really appreciate what you do, providing a platform for people from both ends in the church. I love to hear it.
Yeah, I think that your take and your approach in podcasting is going to build a lot of bridges right across the Ice Age, maybe. I'm not sure about that, but I'm sure you're going to have a lot of success in what you do. And maybe next time we can get Kate on, right?
Right. Yeah, we haven't got him here yet, so we'll have to be back. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I want to give a shout out to Weird Alma on bandcamp.com for this episode's music. And thanks so much, Mike, for ruminating with me on the great and spacious beehive. And remember, no unhallowed hand can stop this podcast from progressing. So long.
When it comes to nicknames of the church, such as LDS Church, the Mormon Church, to remove the Lord's name from the Lord's church is a major victory for Satan.
Satan.